What's up, everyone on YouTube? I am Larry the Batman fan, where we focus on the majority of the videos, that is, we focus on the gaming content. I'm back with another video. I just had to think of some things over the time, a few days, to talk about because I didn't want to make a video and have nothing to talk about. So I was watching John Riggs, and then he gave me an idea. He has a video up on his channel talking about recommending one game for each console that you have. So I'm actually going to do that here. So for the NES, I might have to do two actually because it's kind of hard to narrow it down to one. But for the NES, games that I definitely recommend you play. I mean, if we're talking like underrated, I would say Double Dragon. That's fun. I mean, I guess it's not super underrated, but it's good. And excuse me, to name a few others, Battletoads is a pretty good game. You know, um, Blaster Master is a fun one. RC Pro Am, Batman. Those are a few that I can think of off the top of my head. They're just fun games that you can play on your NES that aren't too expensive. They're around $15 or less, you know. So, but the must owns for the NES is pretty obvious. It's, you know, Super Mario Bros. 3, the original Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 2, even though that game was basically a lie, because that game was Doki Doki Panic here, but they slapped it on there and called it Super Mario Bros. 2. We got the inferior version of what Super Mario Bros. Was supposed to be that was in Japan. Although they did rectify that with the Super Nintendo game, Super Mario All Stars. So they did for that give us the real version, but you had to own the Super Nintendo cartridge. Of course, The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, and Castlevania 3 which was the best out of all three of them, and Kirby's Adventure. Just to name a few, those are some other must-owns for the NES. For the Super Nintendo, the must-own games, in my opinion, is definitely Super Metroid, Castlevania 4, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 2 and 3, Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2. Also, the third one's really good as well. Almost forgot that one. Super Mario Kart, Super Mario RPG, and Super Mario World. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And of course, F-Zero and Secret of Mana. I think that one's a must-own as well. Those are just a few that I can name off the top of my head. But as far as underrated games on the Super Nintendo, I'd say Operation, Logic Bomb. That's an underrated game. It's good. I saw recently the price on that is about 40 or $50 from DK Oldies. I should have kept my copy because I remember getting it for dirt cheap, like $5 or $6 years ago. So that one's not a very cheap, underrated game. You got the WWF Royal Rumble and WWF Super WrestleMania. I know they're LJN games, but they actually weren't that bad, to be honest. Excuse me. Oh, you had RoboCop versus the Terminator, although I think the game plays better on Sega Genesis, but that's just my personal opinion. Top Gear 1 and 2, and you had gosh, what's some other Batman Returns, that's awesome. I know there's Batman Forever, but screw that game. That game was terrible. Terrible movie license game. You had Flashback, The Quest for Identity, X-Men Mutant Apocalypse. Those are just a few more games that I consider underrated. Pac-Mania, So then the N64, the best games on the system. I know I've talked about this before. Um, I've done several top 15s. If y'all haven't seen those top 15s, be sure to check them out. But we're gonna mention them here. Super Mario or Mario 64 rather, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. You had Destruction Derby, which I thought was a really fun game. Well, I guess that one goes under the underrated. We'll get to that. Mario 64. That game is one of the best on the system. Conker's Bad Fur Day, another great one. Those are some of the ones that I consider the must owns. And the underrated ones is Destruction Derby 64. And there's also Jet Force Gemini. Um, Army Men Sarge's Heroes. I guess that game's kind of underrated. You got Rampage 2. Excuse me. There's a couple of wrestling games that I would consider underrated, but I just feel like they're well known anyways. And 64, as far as underrated games, it seems harder to do because there was only 296 games in the collection for that system rather, and less underrated titles. You know, um, even Turok. Turok 2 is a good game. Turok 3 I liked. Shadows of Oblivion and Rage Wars was okay. First Turok game was garbage in my opinion because the draw distance in the game was horrible. Just the first one was. But some people think the first Turok game was good. I don't think it was that great. Um, trying to think. There is a puzzle game called Word Treks or Weird Treks. That game I would consider underrated. And I don't think too many people talk about Monopoly on the N64, which is a good game for the N64. It kept their original standard rules. Later Monopoly games on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 4, they really changed Monopoly, changed how the games played and stuff. And then I think the last one we're gonna do, because this will be a part two and a part three. Last one we're gonna do is probably Nintendo GameCube. Yes, I know they're all Nintendo, but trust me, when we do a part two, we will be covering Sega and PlayStation as well. The Nintendo GameCube was like the last really great Nintendo console until the Switch came around, because the Wii and the Wii U really aren't that amazing. There's some good games for the Wii and the Wii U, but it's overshadowed by games that are either on different consoles that I could pick up on a much better console, or just a bunch of garbage that nobody wants to play. Bunch of shovelware games that no one cares about. for the GameCube, the must-own games for the GameCube. I know I've done the top 15, but I'm going to mention them here. You know, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Super Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, excuse me, Legend of Zelda, Twilight Princess, Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker, Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 1 Remake, Resident Evil 2, and Resident Evil 3. Excuse me. Star Fox Adventures, and you know, Metroid Prime. And those are some of the best games that I can mention for the console. Underrated titles for that system. I honestly feel like Second Sight doesn't get enough love. That's an underrated game. It's like a stealth game, you know, where a guy gets like this power, this telekinesis power in his hands, and he's in like a place and he's trying to get out of it and everything. It starts off kind of slow. You don't really have much except for a gun that you pick up along the way. Eventually, you get other powers and you're trying to figure out who it is that you are exactly. I think it's a really good game. It's a stealth game, but it does have like power stuff going on in it. And it does have some shooting in the game because you take out enemies in the game. I think that game's underrated. You know, X-Men Next Dimension, that's underrated. There's a handful of underrated GameCube games, surprisingly. There really is. Those are a couple I can think of. You know, I don't want to say like Skies of Arcadia or anything like that, Final Fantasy, because they're really not that underrated for games. You know, you got to really dig deep to find them. You know what's another underrated GameCube game? I know it was released on PS2 as well, but it plays a little bit like 300. It's called Spartan Total Warrior. I think that game's good. It's on GameCube and PS2, I believe. I don't know if it was on the original Xbox. Might have just been PS2 and GameCube. But I played it on GameCube, and I thought that was a really good game. Kind of reminded me of 300 and Gladiator. Kind of reminded me of that. It was really good. And it's an underrated gem, in my opinion, for the GameCube. You know. So yeah, that's some of the games that I would mention for must owns and then like the underrated gems, in my personal opinion. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I thank you all for watching and tuning in, and God bless you all. Have a wonderful day and take care. Peace.